Hi everyone, welcome back to Art of the Part. In this video, we're going to take a look at our Arbor Press case study in SolidWorks, and we're going to try to take this CNC milled part and turn it into a cast component so that we can make molds from it. Additionally, we want to create multiple configurations so that we can maintain our CNC milled part as well as our cast component. That way we can run finite element static studies on each one of the models. As most of you know, traditional CNC parts are going to have perpendicular edges for ease of manufacturing. However, we need to take those perpendicular edges and turn them into angled or draft edges so that they can be better pulled from a mold. The reasoning behind this is that perpendicular faces are difficult to release because they'll have constant friction on the entire face while they're trying to be pulled from the mold. Whereas drafted or angled edges, as soon as you break one point of contact, you're going to release the entire part. So think of your ice cube tray in your freezer and why those ice cubes have drafted or angled edges. How difficult would it be to pull a perfectly square ice cube without breaking the tray? So let's go ahead and get started. We can begin by looking at some of these boss extrudes and seeing if we can apply draft to them. So I'll go over here to the left hand side in my feature tree, and I'm going to go to that first boss extrude, right click on it, and this is going to open up that drop down menu. We're going to look for the edit feature at the top left of the window. It's just going to be this icon with a blue box and a pencil next to it, so click on edit feature, and this is going to open up that boss extrude 1. We can see that we're extruding this a distance of 750 from the top plane, and right beneath that distance we're going to look for this icon, which is basically a pyramid on its side missing its point. This is going to be your draft on and off. So click on that icon and this is going to turn your draft on. You can see that it's trying to apply 1 degree to this extrusion, and I want to use this as a rule of thumb for all of these extrusions, and we want to use 3 degrees of typical draft. So we'll type in 3, we can hit the enter key, and you can see that draft is applied to that entire extrusion. So we'll just move up here to the top left of the window and we'll hit the green check mark. And you can see that this really didn't go as planned. There's a handful of features in our feature tree that are now overdefined or just completely invalid. So I'm going to say that that draft is not applicable to this extrusion. So we'll go back into that boss extrude, we'll right click on it, and then from the top left of the window we'll click on edit feature, and then we're just going to toggle off that draft that we just added. So click that, it's going to turn it off, and then from the top left of the window we'll hit the green check mark. Next, we'll move into that second boss extrude, and we're just going to follow this exact same workflow where we open up each one of these features to see if we can or can't apply draft where the model will rebuild. So we'll move down here to that boss extrude 2, we'll right click on it, and then from the top left of this window we'll select edit feature. We can see that this is a mid-plane extrusion from the right plane, and if I try to apply draft, that means that we'll see draft on both sides of this extrusion. So we'll come down here to the icon for draft on and off, we'll turn it on, and then we'll try to apply 3 degrees of draft, we'll hit enter, and then from the top left of the window here, we'll select the green check mark. And once again, we're seeing a lot of issues with our feature tree, and even more so with some of these features that aren't rebuilding at all. And I think that has to do with that mid-plane extrusion and that we're applying draft to all of the outside edges and not just the ones that we want. And we can start to see that as we zoom in and rotate around the model. And you can see that this does look like it is connected. However, the more that we rotate, we start to see a gap form between the bottom of this edge and the top of this surface. And I think this is causing a lot of these fillets from being rebuilt because the edges they were referencing no longer exist. So I think it's safe to say that this draft will not work unless we remodel our entire part. So I want to go ahead and undo that, and we can obviously go back here into the boss extrude 2 and then edit the feature and then remove the draft. But since this was the last command we did, we can hold down the control key on our keyboard and then we can also click Z. And that's going to undo that draft that we just tried applying to that boss extrude 2. And we can see that our radii or our fillets are now rebuilding and there's no longer a gap at the bottom of our model. So let's return back to the isometric view. I'll hit the space button on my keyboard, and from the top right corner of the orientation window, I'll click isometric. So by now you can probably gather that we can't apply drafts to these boss extrudes, at least for this model because of the way that it was drawn. And as a bad example, I'll just process the next 2 boss extrudes. I'll go over here to the left hand side in my feature tree. I'll right click on boss extrude 3. I'll edit the feature. I'll turn on my draft, I'll change this to 3, hit enter, and then I'll hit the green check mark. And you can see that the fillet 6 will not rebuild. I'll hit Control Z to undo that. I'll go down here to my boss extrude 4, I'll right click on that, edit the feature. I'll turn on my draft, I'll change this to 3, hit enter, and then I'll hit the green check mark from the top left. And we see issues with fillet 2, fillet 4, and fillet 5. So I'll hit Control Z to undo that, and I just have to find a way to add drafts outside of my boss extrude features. But before we do that, I want to make our modeling experience just a little bit easier. So let's set up some configurations, and that way we can maintain our CNC milled part, as well as create new configurations for our cast component and our mold model. So let's move into our configurations tab, and that's going to be located here on the left-hand side in our features tree. And then we'll go all the way here to the top of the window, and we can see a handful of different tabs. We're going to look for the third tab, which is going to be the icon of two boxes connected by a stem. We'll click on that Configurations Manager, and this is going to open up your Configurations Manager tab. And then right now we can see that we're currently sitting in our default configuration. So I don't want to have anything selected. Make sure that you don't see anything highlighted here. We're going to right click below that default configuration, right click, and this is going to open up that drop down menu. We'll select Add Configuration. And this is going to allow us to title a new configuration. I'm going to title this configuration Mold-P2. And then we'll hit the green check mark, and you can see that we added that new configuration to our configuration manager. And at this point we could add another configuration for our cast component, but I think this is going to be a little bit easier to understand if we're just looking at the mold model first. Likewise, we can rename our default configuration to our CNC milled part. All we have to do is click, wait, and then click again to rename that. So up here where it says default, we'll click, wait, click again, and then you can see I can change the title of this, and I'll say that this will be milled, and then I'll say -P1. So now we have our milled P1 configuration as well as our mold P2 configuration. You can activate each one of these configurations by double clicking on it, and you can see that the milled 1 P1 is now highlighted, and I see a check mark next to it, and then I can also activate mold P2. We want to make sure that we have mold P2 activated before I start making these changes, because these drafts are going to be saved to this configuration only. Additionally, I want to start looking at this model from a mold making perspective, and I can do so by activating or adding my Mold Tools tab. So in the top left here, in our ribbon where we see Features, Sketch, so on and so forth, I just want to right click on any one of these tabs. So for example, I'll right click on SolidWorks Add-ins, and it's going to open or expand out this drop down menu. We'll come down here to Tabs, and then we're going to try to locate our Mold Tools. So once I click on Mold Tools, this is going to activate or add that Mold Tools tab to my ribbon. We'll click on Mold Tools, and you can see that there are a whole array of features that are specific to mold making. The first feature that I want to talk about is the Draft Analysis tool, and that's going to help us visualize what surfaces need drafts or angles before they can be pulled from a mold. So here inside the Mold Tools tab, we're going to find this Draft Analysis icon. It's on the top row, it's the third icon to the right. We'll click on Draft Analysis, and this is going to open up a properties bar here on the left hand side, which will allow us to pick a plane of reference as well as set a threshold or a tolerance for the angles that are being projected from that plane. So let's think about how we're going to pull this part from the mold. I think the best approach would be to make two pieces and make one for the left and one for the right, and then we can have a symmetrical mold where our parting line is right down the middle of our part or from that right plane. So let's set this up on the left-hand side underneath our analysis parameters. We're going to find a blue box which will allow us to set the direction of pull. And we want to make this our right plane because that's going to run down the middle of our part, and we can make that left and right side mold. Now, I can't see my right plane or my entire feature tree for that matter because it's currently being hidden by this Draft Analysis properties bar. So if I want to locate that, I'm just going to move out here to my viewport, and then the top left of the window I can see the name of my part or the component that I'm working on. There should be a little black arrow, we'll hit that, and that's going to drop down our entire feature tree. So we're just going to locate the right plane here, and we're going to set that for that direction of pull. And you can start to see some feedback here in our viewport where faces and surfaces are now being highlighted in green, yellow, and red. And we can see here underneath our color settings that green is going to be positive draft, yellow requires draft, and then red is going to be negative draft. So this is all being driven by our threshold angle, which is located beneath our direction of pull or that right plane that we just set up. So you can see that this is currently set to 3 degrees, which is telling me out here in the viewport that all these yellow surfaces or faces need at least 3 degrees of draft before they can be pulled from the mold on that right plane. Likewise, if you move over these surfaces, you can actually see a display of that draft angle to the right of your mouse. And this can be helpful if you're trying to determine if something needs more or less draft. So by the end of this, I'd really like to see most of, if not all of these surfaces here highlighted in green from the right plane. And just to show you an example of what that looks like, I'm going to change my threshold angle from 3 degrees to 0 degrees. And you can see all of those surfaces highlighted now in green. However, we do have a typical draft angle of 3 degrees, so I will need to change this back here to 3. And we can use all these yellow surfaces as reference as we begin to apply draft to our model. Now, my advice is to hit the red X to close draft analysis, because if you hit the green check mark, it's going to save this visualized view on your screen unless you come back and toggle off your draft analysis. So I'm just going to come over here, hit the red X, return back to my configurations tab, and then we're going to move here from our configurations manager all the way over here to the left into our feature tree. So as I said before, I want to process the CNC milled part as a mold model first, and then I can come back and create my cast component later. So the first thing that I want to do is suppress all the details that I would have to come back and mill even if this was a cast component. So that's going to include the through holes here for the rack and the pinion, as well as the slot and the through hole here for the surface plate. And if I wanted to, I can click on one of the surfaces of the feature, and it'll actually highlight and show itself over in the left-hand side in my feature tree. Now, there's two ways that I can go about suppressing this detail after I have it selected. So once you click on it, and if you leave your mouse on that surface, you can move up here into the quick toolbar, and you can find the fourth icon on the top row for suppress. It's just going to be an arrow pointing down with two boxes, one opaque, one transparent. Alternatively, I can look on the left-hand side of my feature tree, and I can see that the surface that we currently have selected is linked to the Cut Extrude 3. So if I right-click on Cut Extrude 3, it's going to open up this drop-down menu, and from this top toolbar here in the top row, the third icon to the right, I can see my Suppress feature. So whichever way is your preference, just select on that icon so we can suppress this detail, and we'll click on Suppress, and we can see that we've removed that cut from the model. Now, we aren't deleting that feature. We're just temporarily turning it off, and more specifically turning it off for this configuration, because it still exists here in our feature tree. We can see our cut extrude, however, it's just currently grayed out. That means that the geometry is still there, it's just probably active on another configuration. So think back to our CNC milled part. And again, that's the beauty of suppress. It's not deleting features, it's just temporarily turning them off. So let's follow the exact same workflow and suppress our next through hole, which is going to be here at the top for the rack. So I'll click on the surface, and we can see that it's linked to Cut Extrude 2 in the feature tree. And as long as we haven't moved our mouse, let's access that quick toolbar. And in the top row, the fourth icon to the right, we'll find Suppress. Click on Suppress, and we'll see that that's going to turn off that feature. And we can see that we also suppress Cut Extrude 4 from the feature tree. So the geometry from Cut Extrude 4, which would be 4 holes on each one of the corners of that square, were linked to that Cut Extrude 3, which was the square. So once this got turned off, it also turned off the geometry that was linked to it. Now, I know I have two more features to suppress. That's going to be the slot and the through hole for that surface plate. And instead of clicking on each one of those pieces of geometry, why don't I just suppress this here from the feature tree? I'll click on the Cut Extrude 5. I can see that that's going to highlight that slot. I'll also hold down my Shift key, and I'll click on Cut Extrude 6, so I have both of these entities selected, and I can see both the slot and the through hole are now selected in my viewport. I'll right-click on one of those two features, and from the top row here, I'm just going to select Suppress. And you can see that we suppress both of those details with one click, and I don't see any other through holes that we need to fill to move forward in our mold making process. So now we're going to start to think about our strategy and how we're going to apply these drafts without breaking the model. So I think this is going to be a two-step approach, and step one is going to be removing the fillets from the equation. That way we can just focus on our flat faces, and we're not going to cause any rebuild errors with the draft because it's trying to make an angle on a circular surface here that's blending between, say, like 90 degrees and 0 degrees. So let's take a look at our feature tree, and we can see that we have all these fillets down here at the bottom. Now, I just want to roll this back so I can start creating features before fillet 1. And if you look at the bottom of your feature tree, there's this blue line, and if you hover your mouse over it, you'll actually see this pinch icon. So if you click, hold, and drag this, you can actually move your feature tree back in time, and I'm going to go right before my fillet 1. So this rollback bar is going to work a lot like suppress, where we can temporarily turn off our features. However, they have not been disabled from the feature tree. So if I click, hold, and drag this rollback bar all the way down here to the bottom, I can see that my fillets are returned and our model is rebuilt. So another way that we can use the rollback feature as well is if I right-click on a feature, and I'm going to open up this drop-down menu, and from the top row, the third icon over, there's this arrow. We're just going to click on that. That's going to be your rollback feature, and that's going to place your rollback bar before the feature that you just selected. So now that we've removed our fillets from the equation, let's move on into step 2, which is to start treating this part like a two-piece mold that requires a left and a right half. So I'm going to cut this part in half, and we can just focus on the right side. So I'll move up here to my right plane. I'll right-click on my right plane. From the drop-down menu, I'll start a sketch. And this is going to reorientate your part here in the viewport. And then from the top left-hand corner, we're going to be here inside of the Sketch tab. We're going to look for the rectangle icon in our gallery. It's going to be the second row, first icon. Hit the drop-down menu, and we're going to find the corner rectangle. We'll start this corner rectangle on the origin from the bottom right, and we're just going to drag this out here to the top left and make that coincident with that corner. We'll hit the green check mark, then we'll move into our Features tab, and inside of Features, we're going to find our Extruded Cut. So click on Extruded Cut. Once again, this is going to reorientate your part to the isometric view. We're going to change the direction here from blind to through all, and then we'll hit the green check mark. Once again, you can see that we've added that cut extrude here in our feature tree right above fillet 1, which is where we set our rollback bar. So now that we've eliminated our fillets from the equation, as well as cut the part in half, we can start to apply drafts to our model to prepare this for the mold. So I do want to make mention that the draft feature we'll be using is available here in the stock or the standard features tab. It's located right next to linear pattern, and it's above shell but below rib, so you can see draft right there. However, I do want to be using the draft analysis tool we were looking at earlier, so I want to be working out of that mold tools tab. So click on mold tools, and you can see that draft is located right here. So we'll click on draft, and this is going to look a lot like our draft analysis tool. But before we do anything, I just want you to make sure that you are working out of manual. Sometimes by default, it will send you to draft expert, and the selections could be a little bit different. So make sure you're working from manual, and the type of draft here is going to be from the neutral plane. Next, we'll take a look at our draft angle, and earlier we talked about our typical draft being 3 degrees. So we're going to have to update this from 1 to 3, and then we'll hit enter. And then we'll look at our neutral plane. So when we were using the draft analysis tool earlier, we had to set a direction of pull to be used as reference. And we made that the right plane because we're going to be making a left and a right side mold. So here inside the neutral plane, let's select on this blue box. And we can't see the right plane right now because it's being obscured by the draft feature. So we'll move out here into the viewport, and from the top left of the window, we can see the name of our arbor press. And there's going to be a drop-down arrow there. We'll click on that to expand out our feature tree, and we're going to locate the right plane. So click on the right plane, and then we'll start to look at our faces to draft. Now, this can be a little bit confusing at times, but I think an easy way for us to understand this is if I took this entire profile and I tried to extrude it from the right plane, then I applied draft to that boss extrude, I would see all these outside edges change with that draft angle. But since this is a manual draft, we're saying that the neutral plane, or the right plane that we just established, is going to be that point of extrusion. So all these faces to draft, if I click on this pink box, are going to be the outside faces of this profile as if I was extruding it from the right plane. So make sure to grab the inside and underneath, as well as this cut extrude that's on the inside here. So we'll click on those, and then there's two sneaky surfaces that you can't see behind that circular profile from certain angles. We'll also grab on that circular profile, and then don't forget the back two faces here from this boss extrude. We don't want to include this top face or the bottom face because they're crucial to the design of this component. We're going to have that surface plate up here, and this has to sit flat on the table. So don't include those two. And if you look at the left-hand side in my faces to draft, I've selected 18 different faces. If I want to see what that looks like, I can say show preview down here in the bottom left of this draft feature. You can see that this is rebuilding pretty nicely. And then all the faces that we selected in pink are getting that draft angle of 3 degrees. So I'm just going to hit the space button and then go to my isometric view, and then we'll hit the green check mark from the top left to apply this draft. So you can see that that worked out pretty great for us. So let's check this draft that we just applied against the draft analysis tool that we were looking at earlier. So up here in the top left in our ribbon bar, make sure that you're in that mold tools tab, and then I'm going to find that draft analysis icon. Click on draft analysis, and then here where we have the direction of pull, let's go ahead and establish that to the right plane again. So we'll have to expand out our feature tree, find our right plane, and then make sure that your threshold angle is set to 3 degrees. And you can see out in the viewport here that this is a massive improvement from what we were looking at earlier. Previously, we had all these faces that were highlighted in yellow that require draft, and just going through and applying that one draft really made this part way more moldable. The only issues that I'm seeing here are the top face for the surface plate, and then the bottom face where it's going to sit on the tabletop. However, I do want to apply one more draft so that we can pull this from the mold just a little bit easier so that we can maintain these flat faces. So again, we don't want to hit the green check mark if we want to back out of draft analysis. We're going to have to X out of it. So in the top left here, we're just going to hit cancel. Otherwise, you're going to paint your entire part green. So let's return back to the isometric view. I'll hit the space button on my keyboard, click on isometric, and then I want to move into my next draft. So here inside the Mold Tools tab, I'm going to look for my draft feature icon, click on draft, And then once again, just double check that you are working in manual. The type of draft is set to neutral, and the draft angle is 3 degrees. And then for our neutral plane, we'll click on this blue box, and instead of linking this to one of these planes here from the feature tree, we're actually going to make this neutral plane this top face, which is going to seat the surface plate. So click on that face there. And the reason why we're selecting this face as opposed to the top plane is because I want to maintain the dimensions of this face because it's going to mate up against our surface plate. If I select a lower face, say that top plane down here, we're actually going to shrink the width of this face because we're applying the draft from a lower surface. So let's take a look at our faces to draft. We'll click on this pink box on the left-hand side, and then I'm just going to select all the faces that would be perpendicular to that face there. So I'll click on that face, we'll click on these two faces. I'm also going to include this internal face here, and then we'll select on this outside face as well. We do not want to select on this circular surface because it will be crucial to how the hand wheel will mate up to the final assembly. So we can go over here to the left-hand side. We can see that we have 6 faces selected here in our faces to draft. We can also show the preview. We'll click on the show preview button. It looks like this draft is working out pretty well for us. So let's go ahead and apply this. I'll go up here to the top left. We'll hit the green check mark. And then again, this is always good practice, but let's check that draft against our draft analysis tool. So up here in the Mold Tools tab, we'll go and find our draft analysis, click on that. And then here for our direction of pull, we'll set this to the top face there. And you can see that all these faces got highlighted in green from when we applied that draft. So this is going to make it all that much easier to pull this part from the mold, especially if we have to keep a couple faces flat. So let's back out of draft analysis. Again, don't hit the green check mark. We're going to hit X. And then I want to take a look at the back side because when we applied that last draft, you can actually see that we created this thin wall feature where the draft is going into the part. So let's return back to our isometric view. I'll hit space on my keyboard and then I'll go to my isometric view. When I click on this feature here, it says that it's currently linked to the draft, and that's true. However, I know that this cut here is the only cut extrude that's active inside of our feature tree. So I'm going to right click on cut extrude 1, and from the drop down menu at the top left of this window, I'm going to select edit feature. Now this is going to correlate back to your drawing, and if you look at the P2 revision table, you'll see that the depth of this cut needs to be updated from a 1/2 inch to 250. So I'm going to change this value here to 0.250. And then before I hit the green check mark, this is only applicable to your P2 drawing. So our P1 drawing, we still want to maintain that 1/2 inch depth. So over here in the bottom left, under configurations, you just want to make sure that this is only going to be applied to this configuration. And then we'll hit the green check mark. And we can see from the back side of the model, if we rotate it, we've now removed that thin wall feature. So I think this has addressed any outstanding issues, and we can go ahead and rebuild the rest of the model with our fillets. So over here on the left-hand side in our feature tree, let's go ahead and grab our rollback bar, and we're just going to drag this all the way down here to fillet 7. And you can see that there are some rebuild issues, but that's just because we don't have the opposite side of the part. We haven't mirrored this over yet. So we'll hit space and then return back to our isometric view. And then I'm going to start addressing some of these fillets here in our feature tree. So I'll right click on fillet 1, and this is going to open up our drop down menu. We're going to go all the way up here to the top left of the window and select edit feature. And we have 2 errors here. It's saying that we're missing some edges, and that's fine because we cut the part in half and it's looking for the edges that no longer exist. So the quick way to kind of work around this is just to hit the green check mark. I'll hit the green check mark. It says there are some missing entities. Do I want to remove them? I'll hit yes. And now that fillet is all good. So we're just going to continue that workflow and look at each one of these fillets that has errors on them. So over here on the left-hand side of my feature tree, I'll right-click on fillet 2. Again, we're going to get that drop-down menu. Top left, we're going to grab edit feature. And then, hey, I'm missing a couple edges. We're just going to hit the green check mark. Green check mark. We're going to remove those missing entities. Hit yes. And that rebuilds just fine. So let's move down into fillet 4. Right-click, edit feature. Some missing edges. Green check mark. Remove those entities. Hit yes. Fillet 5. Right-click, edit feature. Green check mark, yes. Fillet 6, right click, edit feature, green check mark, hit yes. And you can see that we made pretty quick work of those fillets and we have no more errors in our feature tree. So since we removed those edges because they were missing on the other side, let's just mirror this whole body over. So let's move over here to the top left in our features tab, and then we're going to look for our mirror features. So we'll click on mirror. And this is where it's starting to get important for us to understand the differences between like features and bodies, because features are just going to be individual entities. So like these fillets could be a feature, the extrusion can be a feature. However, if I want to mirror the entire body over to include all these extrusions and all these fillets, I'm going to change this over here from the left-hand side. So features to mirror, we're going to actually go down here to bodies to mirror. So click on bodies to mirror, and then here in this blue box, we're going to select this entire body, and then we want to mirror it about the right plane, so that's going to be our plane of symmetry. So up here in the top, we're going to click on the mirror face. We're going to have to expand out our feature tree once again, and we're just going to look for that right plane. So you can see that we're mirroring this entire body. That includes all the extrusions, all the fillets, all the drafts, and then from the top left, we'll hit the green check mark to mirror this over. And there you have it. We've successfully prepared this model for molding purposes. We filled all of our open holes. We've also added drafts to all these faces so that we can successfully pull the part from the mold. And then we mirrored this body over so that we can create a symmetrical left and right mold. So all we have left to do is just a little bit of housekeeping so we can update our configurations for the milled model as well as create a new configuration for the cast model. So we'll move over here into the left-hand side in our feature tree. And from the top left, we're going to move from the feature tree tab all the way over here to the right into our configuration manager, which is going to be those two boxes connected by stems. So click on the configuration manager, and then right beneath mold, I want you to right click and then add a configuration. And we're just going to say cast-P2. We'll hit the green check mark, and then inside this cast2 configuration that we just created, we're going to use the exact same mold model that we ended up with. However, we're just going to unsuppress some of those holes that we suppressed earlier. So we're going to move from the configuration manager all the way over here to the left in our feature tree. And then I'm just going to click on the cut extrude 2 from my feature tree, hold down the shift key, and then click on the cut extrude 6 so that all of my cut extrudes are selected. I'll right click on one of the features, and then this is going to open up our drop-down menu, and we're going to look for that unsuppress icon at the top left of the window. So this is actually going to be the suppress icon just in reverse. So we'll click on unsuppress, and that's going to turn on all those features again. So now we have our finished cast component for the ArborPress P2, and we can use this model to run our finite element static studies against. And while we're here in this configuration, let's just change the material from 6061 to the gray cast iron. So I'll right click on 6061 from the drop down menu, we'll click edit material, and then we're here inside the aluminum alloys folder, so I'm going to have to scroll all the way up and compress down the aluminum alloys folder. We'll expand out the iron folder, and then we're just going to look for gray cast iron SN, and then as always, change your units here to megapascals. We'll hit apply, and then we'll just close this window, and we just need to go back into our configuration manager and then update our milled P1. So up here in the top row here, we'll click on configuration manager, and then we're just going to try to rebuild this milled P1. We'll double click on it, and you'll notice that we are missing some fillets here on the left side. And that's because this configuration doesn't recognize that we created a cut extrude and a mirrored body. So we're just going to have to activate that here on the milled P1 configuration. So over here in the top left, we'll go into our feature tree. We're going to find that cut extrude 7, click on it, and then we're going to hold down the control key on our keyboard. And then we'll also select the last feature, which is going to be that mirror 2. And then while you have both of these selected, we'll right click on one of them. And then from the drop down menu, we'll click unsuppress. And there you can see that we've rebuilt the model. This is exactly what we started with the milled P1 version. So just as a good double check, let's just jump back here into our configurations manager. And whenever you have a check mark next to the current configuration, that means that it's rebuilt. So you just want to rebuild all these configurations. And sometimes when you're going into Mastercam, if you have a minus next to one of those configurations, Mastercam will not recognize that file to be imported. So just double click on all these configurations until you see a check mark next to each one of them. Additionally, we can manage our configurations and even some configuration equations from the feature tree. So I'll jump over here to the feature tree tab, and then I'm going to look at the cut extrude 1 because we did change that depth from one configuration to another. So I'll right click on this, and this is going to open up the drop down menu, and then we're going to look for this icon for configure feature. So click on configure feature, and this is going to open up your configuration table, and you can see here that D1, this is dimension 1 for that depth. I can actually change this from this window to be, 250 for the cast, 250 for the mold, but a ½ inch for the milled P1. And then another helpful tool here is if you go down to the stoplight in the bottom left of this window, it says rebuild active configuration, hit the drop down menu, and you can actually rebuild all configurations. And I use this method all the time, especially when I have like 10 or 20 different configurations that I need to rebuild and I don't want to have to double click on each one of them. So you can click on rebuild all configurations. It's going to run that in the background. We can hit OK, and then we'll jump back into our configuration manager. And let's just leave ourselves here in the milled P1 configuration. So double click on milled P1, and now this file is ready to be saved and used for your static studies as well as your assemblies for mold making, and then you can import it in Mastercam as well. So I hope you enjoyed my explanation of taking the CNC milled part and turning it into a mold model as well as a cast component. There's a lot that goes into drafts and draft analysis as well as managing all these configurations for these different revisions. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.